ultimate future as individuals, as a world, has long intrigued me. I track eschatologies, doctrines and explorations of final things, including life after death and the far future of the universe. Although I remain skeptical of claims beyond science, I cannot rid myself of the notion that the physical world is not all there is. I should declare a personal interest. My age is advancing. I'm approaching 80. You'd think this is why I'm brooding about death and what may or may not come after. But that is not so. Truth to tell, my personal passion in ultimate futures has been lifelong, literally since I was 12. I've followed over the decades eschatological visions and philosophical arguments of the Abrahamic religions, especially Christianity. I thought I knew lots, analytically, historically, scripturally, but I knew only some. I've underappreciated religions of the East, especially Hinduism and Buddhism, also Chinese Taoism and Confucianism. I'm not looking for a new belief, but perhaps for an enriched hope. In Eastern traditions, what is our ultimate future? I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn, and Closer to Truth is my journey to find out. With Eastern traditions, I'm on new terrain. With Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, I'm on home turf. The ultimate future is a new heaven and a new earth, and a defined, if debatable, afterlife with depictions of heaven, hell, and kinds of purgatory. What do Eastern traditions have in store for us? What are Eastern ultimate futures? I begin with the Vedas, the Sanskrit religious texts and philosophical meditations, the oldest scriptures of Hinduism, and the wellspring of several Eastern traditions. I speak with a Hindu monk who reads the Vedas with the eye of a Western-trained philosopher, Swami Medhananda. Swami, in Hinduism, what is the ultimate future?
Different traditions within Hinduism answer that question in different ways. But I think Ramakrishna, a 19th century mystic, provides a really useful metaphor for thinking of the two basic paradigms for conceiving the final state within Hinduism. He says that some souls can eat sugar and other souls prefer to become sugar. And so one form of liberation is dwelling in an eternal heaven with the personal God. And there are many different eternal heavens, depending on the form of the personal God that the soul prefers to dwell with. And the soul will, in that higher heaven, will serve God, worship God, along the lines of a kind of Abrahamic heaven, and it's eternal. And then becoming sugar is a very different paradigm where there's no actual eternal heavens at all, and the soul just rests in its nature as non-dual pure consciousness. So these are the two options, and Ramakrishna embraces both. So he always adopts this kind of both and approach to eschatology. So he says, the soul will just choose, and both are equally valid.
They seem radically different.
Yeah.
I would want to eat sugar, not be sugar, but maybe that's just because of my orientation. But they're both the same level of ontological existence?
Absolutely, yeah. According to the tradition that I follow.
Say there were different manifestations of God. So if you be with Moses or Jesus or Muhammad, those are equally valid?
Absolutely, yeah.
And in each of those heavens, there is a God. I mean, you're communing with God in some sort.
In the form that you love. So if you in this life, in the life in which you ultimately attain liberation, your final embodiment, let's say, you love to worship God as Christ, for instance, then you'll go to a Christian heaven in which you can dwell with Christ for an eternity.
And how many different varieties are there of it?
That's actually infinite in a sense, because in Hinduism, there's an idea of God can incarnate in human form, not once, but many times, whenever God feels like it, basically. And so with a new incarnation, that incarnation can actually create a new eternal heaven for devotees of that particular incarnation.
And it's the same God, though?
The same formless personal God can incarnate in different human forms and manifest in different superphysical forms.
Roughly order of magnitude, if I want to eat sugar in one of these rooms, how many choices?
And I don't even think it's a finite number, because as I said, because God will choose to incarnate in the future as well, that new incarnation is going to create a new...
Can you switch rooms?
Sure, but usually what happens is...
Moses can get boring after a while.
Well, there's one thing we have to be careful about, which is projecting our own human limitations into the final state. But that's,
Okay, so now if I want to become sugar and I lose my personal identity, can I ever get it back?
Again, I think different traditions will answer this question in different ways. I think that the very traditional school of non-dualism espoused by Shankara will say no. And the reason being that that's a more ultimate and greater state. So why would you want to restore a more illusory state of existence?
Even if you want, you can't want to anymore because you will have lost that.
Who would be,
So what is the agent that is wanting to go back because it has disappeared?
But that's why there are other Hindu traditions which accept the reality of the personal God as well. So then that would be the agent. The personal God can choose to restore even. Can pull out a kind of individual back from the non-dual state.
So if I make a deal and say, look, I'm going to try to be sugar for a while, and I'm going to lose my identity, but please remember me, so after whatever time frames are defined,
you can pull me back.
Pull me back.
Yeah,
that's a deal I can make?
Yeah, I think if you go back to the original Hindu scriptures, you find this kind of expansiveness. And what happens is, centuries after these scriptures were composed, the philosophical schools get a little bit narrower and more exclusivistic, and they adopt a more of an either-or approach rather than a both-and approach. God can only be personal and in a particular personal form. And I think that there's a kind of broader approach that is actually truer to the spirit of the original scriptures.
I love the eat sugar versus be sugar disjunction in Hinduism's rapturous afterlife. Be your distinct self, eat sugar, or dissolve into the infinite ocean of consciousness, be sugar. It exemplifies the radical distinction in ultimate futures between Western and Eastern traditions. But now I learn, to my surprise, even within Hinduism itself, there is a kind of afterlife choice between radically opposing forms of ultimate existence. It's, well, creative, certainly ecumenical, perhaps appealing. But I'd be really surprised, to say the least, if this be our ultimate future. Perhaps I need a higher kind of consciousness to see the light. I meet a leading thinker in Hinduism's Advaita Vedanta's dominant sub-school of non-dualism, Swami Sarvapriyananda.
So the whole purpose of this universe, embodied existence, is liberation. Is a realization of our infinite nature and freedom from samsara. Now, at death, physical body dies, and the Atman, the soul, with the subtle body, it goes on to other bodies, newer and newer births, and we go through multiple lifetimes, learning until one realizes one's identity with Brahman and one is released. Advaita Vedanta would say at that point you realize none of this actually happened. I mean, it happened at the level of the lower truth. At the level of the movie, yes, it did happen. But there was a background truth where you were always free. You were this infinite Brahman ever.
A couple of quick questions.
Yes.
When you die and the Atman goes to another body, does it happen immediately, or can there be a time lapse?
Oh, there's a time lapse. According to Advaita Vedanta, the Atman doesn't travel anywhere. It's the subtle body which travels.
Okay.
I mean, it's not, movie screen doesn't go anywhere, but the character on the movie screen can travel all over the world in the movie.
Okay.
And it takes time. So in between, there are multiple realms in which, depending on the karma of the person, the self with the subtle body, it can travel. So it's supposed to inhabit different realms, some heavenly, nice ones, some hellish, not so nice ones, and ultimately get a human body and come back to work out its further karma. All of which is, by the way, the Advaita Vedanta would sign off on all of this, but say it's just a movie. It's the lower truth.
Okay. And what is the impact on the totality of reality?
The idea is that there's a God who creates this manifested universe for our benefit. It helps us in our spiritual evolution. So it's quite possible that the universe will be shaped and changed as we need it for our further spiritual evolution.
But is there some point in the future where all Atmans will have gone through the process and therefore there's no need for a physical universe anymore?
Well, that's a theoretical
infinite cycle?
Well, there's a theoretical question. There are two answers to that. One is that everything will end at one point. The universe comes to an end, and those who have become enlightened, they are free forever. Those who are not enlightened, they remain in the seed state, in the unmanifest Maya of God, the power of God, only to wait for the new universe to start again when they are projected out to work out their remaining karma. There's no escape.
Okay, there's no escape, but also there's no end of hope.
There's no end of hope. And Advaita again would add a footnote there. Don't worry, none of this actually happened. So you are Brahman anyway.
Yeah. Well, if you're Brahman anyway, I don't mean to be impolite, but what's the point of the whole process? And at the end, if you're good, you get back to where you were at the beginning.
Right, it sounds like that. But in Advaita doesn't have that problem, because Advaitins immediately will say, I'll give a logical answer to that and a more psychological answer later. The logical answer is, it's not a problem because it didn't happen. So if it appears to you and you are the background reality which you always wear, it's not a problem. If you ask why this thing happened in my dream, it might be of interest to your psychotherapist, but it's not something that you have to report to the police station. But the other way around, the realistic schools, the dualistic schools, they take it seriously and they say we're actually in bondage, moving from a limited state to a state of freedom and bliss and fulfillment. So there's a real price to be gained.
Advaita Vedanta's non-dualism yields an inevitable ultimate future. Consciousness is the only reality. Our Atman soul experiences innumerable lifetimes. We were always the infinite Brahman. This beatific vision to my Western eyes looks bizarre, I admit it. But then, as I think about it, it becomes profound. And then it becomes coherent. I respect that. I'm also taken by the analogy between our dreams to our reality, and on the other side, our reality to ultimate reality. That's also coherent. Such visions of the afterlife, uncountable cycles of reincarnation seeking liberation, does this suggest Hinduism's rival tradition in ancient India? Buddhism? What happens to my self in Buddhism's afterlife? I explore the Buddhist ultimate future with a leading Buddhist nun, a practitioner and believer. She also happens to have a doctorate in religion from Yale, Venerable Ifa.
So in Buddhism, we'll say, okay, the reason we have a death is because we have birth. But without birth, then you don't have a death. But we are still always in this samsara, means reincarnation, like an endless cycle of birth and death, unless you really cultivate it. So then you can kind of cut off this cycle and then jump out from this cycle and become Nirvana, attain the Nirvana and attain the liberation.
And what is that state? What is that Nirvana state for the individual conscious?
So there was no birth and death.
No birth and death. But is there awareness?
Yes, like the Buddha attained the enlightenment at the age of 31. But that also means after 80 years old, he died. Without this body, he is not coming back as a human being. Right. And no more become a human being. Then you don't have a sickness, you don't become aging, and then you don't die. But the truth he attained, or he gave the teaching is there. So that is why we call Dhammakaya, the body of Dhamma. So that means he's a teaching, he's a spirit. The truth is he taught is here.
And in this reincarnation cycle, it can go on endlessly until you reach Nirvana, yes. Or maybe you do something irrevocably terrible and go to the hell or whatever it's called, and stay there.
And as a human being, according to Buddhism, in our previous lives, we could be a dog, we could be an insect, and Also could be in the heavenly.
Oh, you can. You can be a non-physical being as well.
Exactly. You have this, health, ghost or animal or heavenly being, or different stage jumping around.
Oh wow, wow.
Yeah, that's a reincarnation.
But do you get a choice? Do you choose? I want to be an angel or an ant?
It's chosen by your karma.
So.
And the karma is more like energy. It's not like many people think, next life I want to go to heaven. Yes, that's good. It could be your vow. But if you think about, I want to go to heaven, but I kill people, I'm sorry. It's not by your thought, but by your action. That's called karma. And that is why...
Death in Buddhism is the handmaid of rebirth. If no death, no rebirth. The process of cycles of reincarnation is similar to that in Hinduism. The goal, liberation, is also similar. What differs seems to be liberation, the ultimate future, what it's like. The Nirvana of Buddhism versus the infinite Brahman of Hinduism. Could this ultimate future distinction relate to the nature of the self? I ask an expert in Buddhist studies, a philosopher of mind and religion, J. Garfield.
The question of the relationship between death and no self really is a hard one in Buddhism. So, Buddhism is in a real sense, first and foremost, an Indian religious and philosophical tradition. So when Buddhism arose, the idea of rebirth or reincarnation is just accepted in India as part of the background. So the Buddha really assumed a doctrine of rebirth. But let's begin by distinguishing reincarnation from rebirth. If we were to be reading a non-Buddhist text, like the Bhagavad Gita, for instance, there's a wonderful metaphor early in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna is trying to tell Arjuna that it's okay to go kill his family members because nobody really dies. Our soul, our Atman, the self, because this is a self tradition, continues. And he says, the next life, it's just like when you wake up in the morning and you took off your clothes the previous night and put on new clothes. Similarly, you put on a body in this life, you'll go to sleep and you'll put a new body on the next life. Death is completely unreal. The soul continues forever. Buddhists would have thought that was crazy. But that is what reincarnation is, that we have a soul or an Atman that gets new carne around it, right? The new meat around it, and just acquires new bodies. But Buddhism doesn't have such a thing, so it's got to refigure rebirth. So when we think about no self in Buddhism, we're always thinking about the reality of a person. And a person is a continuum of psychophysical aggregates. At physical death, that continuum of aggregates falls apart, but Buddhists think, who believe in rebirth, a long footnote here, by the way, rebirth is a big deal in Indian and Tibetan Buddhist traditions. But when Buddhism moved into China, rebirth was a really bad idea. Chinese did not want to see their ancestors still alive, especially not as dogs. And so rebirth kind of drops out of Buddhism in China, Japan, Korea, and a lot of Buddhism in the West explicitly jettisons the idea of rebirth. But still, the idea and what rebirth is talking about makes sense, even if we don't think there's literal rebirth. But Indians and Tibetans really do believe in literal rebirth. So what they believe is that the continuum of consciousness, one of the kind of clusters of psychophysical processes, the one that's kind of got our perceptual and conceptual capacities, continues even when the body dies, and that is the thing that is reborn and associated with a new set of aggregates. The nice thing about this, whether you believe it or not, is it gives us a wonderful metaphor for thinking about our lives as they are now. Because if this is right, rebirth isn't simply something that happens when your body dies. Rebirth is happening every moment. At every moment, you are a new being. So then it's got very good pedagogical value. When you look at the Buddhist representations of the cosmology of rebirth from India and Tibet, there are these 6 realms into which you can be reborn that are represented by the wheel of life image, the Bhava chakra. And so there's an animal realm, There's the realm of pretas, or hungry ghosts. These are these spirits with tiny little mouths and giant bellies who could never get enough. There's the hell realms where all kinds of torture happens. There's the realm of kind of superheroes who are constantly kind of fighting for glory. There's the divine realm, the realm of gods, where everything's ambrosia, gorgeous music, and nice pillows. It lasts for a very, very long time, and then you go to hell. And then there's the human realm, right? And so we're told that our actions and our emotions propel us into the next life, into one of these realms. And you can take those very literally, cosmologically. But remember, they're already represented in a picture. There's already a metaphor there. And that wheel is sitting there in the jaws of death. The idea is that what propels us from existence to existence is vice that's conditioned by the fear of death.
But then the bottom line question is, from a Buddhist point of view, is there any kind of sentient afterlife after this body dies?
Some Buddhists believe that there is, and some Buddhists do not believe that there is. Buddhism isn't a kind of uniform place where everybody agrees about all issues. It's a world of multiple views that are together in a kind of cluster, but are internally at odds with one another. That's okay.
Because no self is so essential in Buddhism, the no self must affect Buddhism's afterlife and ultimate future. Sure, it's a challenge to harmonize the two prime Buddhist doctrines of no self and reincarnation. After all, what is the thing reincarnating? Harmonizing no self with liberation, emptiness, nirvana seems easier. Personally, I'd prefer neither. No self-reincarnation. No self-nirvana. I wonder whether this problem of the self or no self, plus the cycles of death and rebirth, arise in Chinese philosophy. I speak with the director of Rutgers Center for Chinese Studies, philosopher of religion, Tao Jiang.
I don't think that the Chinese philosophy as a whole or has a particular kinds of, vision about the future in the way that, let's say, Christianity paints, in the way Buddhism paints, that a flourishing world that every person is cared for, then there's no longer the kind of suffering that we see in the world. But that's a very social kinds of utopia. It's not the kind of otherworldly kind of ideal. The ideal of a fulfilling life, of a life that is well lived, is that you become an ancestor, and then you enjoy the worship of your offspring. And if you become a sage, then you even enjoy more of the worship of the people who benefits from your benevolence. From
and this is an individual, and that is in a literal sense.
We have no way of knowing what the spirit knows or do not, whether there is awareness or not. In that sense, the Chinese are probably more pragmatic about it. That it's in the way that it's the worshiping of ancestors. The way that the rituals are instituted and regulated is for the offspring, is for the continuity of the lineage, the continuity of the family, the continuity of the society. The Taoist path, you become a xian, right, an immortal. That's or transcendent. Some people translate it, or you become, a Buddha, or a patriarch, a Zen patriarch. So then these are alternative paths. But of course, for a Chinese, they can be all three, right? So it's a very fluid kind of spirituality.
Now, after almost 70 years of pondering human mind, existence of God, life after death, ultimate futures, here's my scorecard. My belief has not strengthened, but my hope has not dimmed. All major religions revere and fear the ultimate future, and all seek the ultimate best. In Abrahamic traditions, the future is, again, a new heaven and a new earth. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, each with its own ultimate best, both for the afterlife of the individual, with or without God, and for the transformation of the world. Similarly, Eastern traditions look to the ultimate future, and of course also seek the ultimate best. But the Eastern ultimate best differs in kind. Hinduism's reincarnations, the soul seeking bliss or absorption into non-dual pure consciousness. Buddhism's rebirths, the non-self person seeking nirvana, a final state of liberation and peak oblivion. Chinese traditions are this world-focused, family, society, state, although ancestor worship may hint at an afterlife. Eastern, Western, possibilities abound. Mix and match. I love exploring varied visions of ultimate futures. Do I want to believe in an afterlife? Of course I do. Do I believe? Of course I do not. Not a belief, but a kind of hope to be closer to truth.
For complete interviews and for further information, please visit closertotruth.com.